no one gets to choose their parents, we all inherit a story, like it or not. But we can choose what to do with that story. I'm Mike Joseph. The story my parents gave me was full of life and loss, wars, genocide, and ethnic cleansing. What should I do with that legacy? What would you do? I was 50 before I did anything at all. Welcome to Keys, a Troubled Inheritance. It's 1993. I'm in Germany, in Leipzig, a crumbling post-Soviet city, once East Germany's second city, now overwhelmed by the social and economic upheavals of German reunification. For 3 years, I've worked to recover my mother's childhood home, clashed with the actual Nazi who stole it 50 years earlier, been obstructed by the city of Leipzig, who thought that returning Jews threatened their city's recovery, and won. My mother has her house back, and I have given her the keys. But the keys mean nothing to her. She does not want a house in a city where she will never return, nor does she want keys to a house that once was home to her murdered family. So now it's my task to track down the Nazi who slaughtered her family in some killing field in Ukraine. How do I do that? By following my family's footsteps from beginning to end. Here are 4 objects: an old photo, a pocket edition, a hatbox, and a huge 2-volume dictionary. These are almost all of Israel Gold's surviving possessions. Between them, they reveal something of my grandfather's story in the First World War, his life before that war, in the Austrian Empire, and after it, in the turbulent new German Republic. This photo, we've seen it before. You might remember it from episode 2.
What a marvellous photo.
I turn to look as well. He's right. It is marvellous. But I don't like this intrusion into my private family reunion. He just won't stop studying the image. 2 soldiers in their new uniforms, ready for war. Yes, it is.
German?
Austrian. I'm not going to say, and Jewish. That's too much exposure. It's not a good week to be Jewish. Last Sunday, Israel's Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated by a Jewish extremist for pursuing peace by withdrawing from occupied Palestine. How much worse can this get? But the attendant wants to hear more. So I point to the younger man in the photo. That's my grandfather on the right, just after he enlisted in the Austro-Hungarian army. And on the left, that's his father. They both joined up in the first year of the war, the First World War, and that's when they had this photo taken. I can't believe it. The attendant still wants more. My great-grandfather died in the First World War. Typhus, I think. And my grandfather, Israel Gold, he was decorated and then murdered in the Second World War.
My father was a small man, but he went into Belsen with his regiment. They shot every German soldier they could lay their hands on.
Genocide is not only a shadow from history, it's in the news every night. People are talking about it. This car park attendant is talking about it. A genocide that affected both his family and mine.
No way could they say they had to do that. Only obeying orders. You don't obey orders like that. Pray God we don't get another like that Hitler.
That Hitler was on the Western Front in the First World War, a front line that, for all its slaughter, remained remarkably free of typhus. Not so on the Eastern Front, where louse-born typhus killed 4 times more soldiers than died in action. It killed my great-grandfather, Leib, as he was visiting his family, his wife and younger children, in a refugee camp in Bohemia, which would soon become Czechoslovakia. His family were there in flight from the war's Eastern Front between Russia and Austria, a front which ran right through their hometown of Stanislau. Leib's oldest child, Israel, was also in the Austrian army and now would be the family's only breadwinner. And here is his military hatbox, with its Austrian army insignia of oak leaves, and this held his military cap. He held the rank of corporal, and he would be decorated. He won the Iron Cross for his service guarding a camp of Czech deserters from the army. They abandoned the Austrian cause as that empire collapsed and a future independent Czechoslovakia beckoned. In fact, by the war's end, it said that the only minority still loyal to the dying Austro-Hungarian Empire were its Jews. So, what about this small red book? Well, it's a cloth-bound, pocket-sized edition of Goethe's Faust, the German masterwork. The year before his father died, Israel Gold was granted leave from fighting for his 21st birthday. And in January 1916, he travelled not east to his family's home in Stanislau or to his family's refugee camp in Bohemia, but west to Leipzig, where he'd just settled before the war, as a young fur trade apprentice. And waiting for him this time in Leipzig was Sophie, a 19-year-old refugee from the Russian front line in the east. This book was a gift to him, her fiancé. She wrote inside, Gewidmet als Andenken an die verhängnisvolle Zeit, zum Geburtstage, and she signs it SK Leipzig, 3rd of January 1916, given in memory of fateful times for your birthday. Her choice of Goethe's Faust shows how Israel and Sophie Gold saw their future after the war in the German lands. The end of that war with the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire was indeed fateful for its many Jews. This had been an empire of minorities, just about hanging together, as no single ethnicity had the upper hand. In the empire's largest and most impoverished province, Galicia, the Ukrainians were the greater part of the rural peasantry, the Poles were the nobility and the ruling class, and the Jews were somewhere in the middle. Other than Lvov, Galicia's capital with its Polish majority, Ukrainians, Poles and Jews struggled to muster a majority elsewhere in Galicia. And that mattered in the empire as it moved towards democracy through the 19th century, even emancipating its Jews in 1867. The empire encouraged Yiddish-speaking Galician Jews to adopt German language and culture, to strengthen the position of its German minority. That must have happened at some point in Israel and Sophie's families, as this gift from Sophie to Israel shows. But with the 20th century and the rise of the Polish national movement, young Galician Jews increasingly became enthusiastic Polish nationalists. That would not end well for Poland's Jews. And as for relations between Jews and Ukrainians, we'll discover soon. But when the empire fell to be replaced by mutually hostile nationalist states, Galicia's Jews were split between their own new nationalist tendency, Zionism, and an equally energetic socialist movement, the Bund, which opposed Zionism and worked for class rather than ethnic solidarity in post-war Europe. Today, the Bund is all but forgotten, but even in late 1938, most Polish Jews would still support the Bund, not Zionism. And finally, what to make of this? This is a 2-volume English-German and German-English dictionary. This would not fit in any soldier's pocket. Each large format volume has over 2,000 pages, and together they weigh over 4 kilos. Is that a problem? Well, let's have a look inside. There's his office stamp that he added to all his library later on, but here is what he wrote when he got this dictionary, and it says, I Gold, 1/117 LE Company, Lubartov, Poland. That was his military company, and Lubartov was Company HQ in southeast Poland. And he also writes the date he got this dictionary, 2nd of November, 1917. Israel Gold was self-taught, multilingual, a keen mountaineer and cyclist, but this acquisition does need some explaining. How did he find a German-English dictionary while stationed with his Austrian regiment in Poland? And why an English dictionary, the language of the enemy? And more than all that, why did he add 4 kilos of dictionary to his kit bag in November 1917? The answer is in that date. In November 1917, the British Army in the Middle East was poised to seize Palestine from Ottoman Turkey. And the British government, without debate, without a vote, believing mistakenly, or perhaps choosing to believe, that Zionism was the overwhelming choice of Jews worldwide, and certainly without consulting the people who actually lived there, granted Palestine as a national home for the Jewish people. Why did the British government do this? To beat the French to Palestine? To undermine Germany and Austria by winning Jewish support? To distract Russian Jews from their alarming support for the revolution? To deliver Zionist cover for Britain's imminent conquest of Palestine? To secure Britain's vital route through the Suez Canal to India? To fulfill biblical prophecy? Or to enlist war support from the all-powerful clandestine Jewish lobby of anti-Semites imagining, especially the American bankers who held the purse strings of war finance? So many reasons. But one certain motive: the government was convinced this would tip the fortunes of war and the subsequent peace in Britain's favour. It wrote the Balfour Declaration in terms vague enough for disputes about its meaning to persist to this day. Despite this, in 1920, it was given the status of international law, written into the terms of the British Mandate for Palestine. And then the British spent 30 years discovering they could not deliver all its promises. A national home for the Jewish people? Yes. No prejudice to the civil and religious rights of existing Palestinians? No. Lord Balfour issued his fateful declaration on November the 2nd, 1917, the same date that my grandfather Israel Gold wrote here in his huge new German-English dictionary. Did news from Whitehall really reach Austrian army barracks in southeast Poland so fast? The Foreign Office was convinced there was no time to waste publishing the declaration in enemy lands. A Jewish section in the Department of Information, headed by a close associate of Zionist leader Chaim Weizmann, produced leaflets in the languages of Jews of Central and Eastern Europe, dropped by air over Jewish centres in Austria and Germany to circulate widely in Poland. News would have reached Israel Gold, if not hours, at most a day or two after the declaration. He would not have hesitated to write in the English dictionary that he got in response the same date as the declaration. All of which raises the question of Israel Gold's Zionism, because this reveals his early support for an ideology that, despite mounting European anti-Semitism, divided all his Jewish communities for the rest of his life, in Germany, Poland, and Ukraine. What kind of Zionist was he? We will find an answer, though it's not all that obvious, as we follow his story between the end of the First World War, which he survived, and the start of the Second, which he didn't.
Raus mit den Männern aus dem Reichstag und raus mit den Männern aus dem Landtag und raus mit den Männern aus dem...
With their revolution underway, the Bolsheviks pulled Russia out of the war, which suited Germany, because in March 1918 they imposed crippling peace terms on Russia, stripping it of 1/3 of its territory. Germany moved its eastern armies to the Western Front, confident in a final victory that Germans believed would be theirs. 8 months later, Israel Gold returned to Leipzig from military service in the now collapsed Austro-Hungarian Empire And the very next day, November the 9th, 1918, the Kaiser fled, the German Reich fell, the red flag flew over Frankfurt, Düsseldorf, Stuttgart and Leipzig. And the people searched for who to blame for their unexpected defeat. A new Germany without a Kaiser, born in military humiliation, street fighting, communist uprisings and right-wing putches. That was the backdrop to Israel Gold's first post-war years in Leipzig. He struggled on, always resourceful, to establish his one-man fur wholesaling business, which would keep him and his family secure, fed, housed and educated for 20 years, until the Nazis stole everything from him. In 1919, he married Sophie, soon started a family. In 1920, their first child, my mother Lily, was born. Soon they would buy a house, a large house in Pariserstrasse, Leipzig. But his letters to his uncle in Switzerland from the last days of the war onwards reveal one big worry.
21st of December, 1918. Dear Uncle, on the 1st of November I was due to go on leave from Lubatov. But just before departing for Stanislaw, this new situation arose, and I had to remain. But fortunately, later I was able to travel, and now I am in Leipzig. However, since early November, I'm without any news from Stanislaw, and am very worried how my family there are doing in such conditions in Galicia.
What are these conditions?
My daughter Asha has a good question.
What's going on in Galicia?
There's an awful lot going on. In October, on the 1st of October, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was dissolved. And right the way across Central Europe, there was a political vacuum. In Galicia, there were two parties contesting for control of Galicia, the Poles and the Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians were quicker off the mark. By the 18th, they'd already formed a national council. And the day after, on the 19th, the Ukrainian National Council declared its republic in Lviv, one of the big features of which was equality for all minorities, which immediately made it stand apart from the Polish bid for nationhood, which was very strongly ethnically based and certainly didn't have the same approach to its minorities as the Ukrainians did at this stage. So by the 1st of November, they were actually in Lviv and they had taken over government. This was a major provocation because although the Ukrainians were a majority just about in Galicia as a whole, in the capital of Lviv, Poles were actually in the majority. So there's no doubt that they were pushing their luck in proclaiming a West Ukrainian republic in Lviv, of all places.
Okay, sure, but what's the consequences of all this for Israel's family?
The first step of the newly declared Ukrainian Republic was to take over wholesale all the laws and statutes of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, unchanged, and to take over the civil service, the public services, the system of law and order. And that certainly led to consequences. On the very next day, the 2nd of November, there was a Polish uprising in Lviv against all this, and by the 21st they had taken control of the capital city of Galicia. And this letter from Israel Gold that we just heard, he wrote on the 21st of December. In that week, the Ukrainians were forced to move their capital out of Lviv, and it arrived in Stanislaviv, Israel Gold's own birthplace. The fighting continued, and in the fighting, the Jews of Galicia in great numbers were joining the West Ukrainian army, replacing Galician Poles, many of whom were now fighting with Poland against the new republic. And in that week, that's when Israel Gold wrote how worried he was for his family in Stanislaviv, and for good reason. And 5 months later, he wrote again to his uncle.
5th of May, 1919. Dear Uncle, I'm completely in the dark about my family in Stanislaw. My wedding is arranged for the 18th of May at 6 p.m, and I ask if it is possible for you and my aunt to come, or at least one of you. Otherwise, I will have no other relatives here.
Well, that's familiar, isn't it? Didn't Lily also get married with no relatives present?
Yeah, it's a horrible case of history repeating itself in the same family. It was 25 years later, almost to the day. You're quite right. She married in Birmingham in 1944 with no family, no news of family, and frankly, not expecting to see them ever again. I wonder if she was thinking of her father, who had married in Leipzig in horribly similar circumstances in May of 1919. For one thing I do know, she never forgot that her mother was carrying a bunch of lilies. So she did think about their wedding.
Do you know if that's why she was named Lily?
I think that's what she thought, so I'm not arguing with that.
Yeah.
Well, in that very week, the Polish-Ukraine war turned decisively against Ukraine as Romania opened a new front and demanded the Ukraine government and forces leave Stanislaviv.
29th of May 1919. Dear Uncle, thank you for your congratulations. We were so sorry that our hopes of your coming were dashed. My wife is an only daughter. She has a secondary education, but her personality is far superior to her education. She's a good, rare soul. I do hope you will meet her. I have no news from Stanislaw and am concerned for my family. 10th of July 1919. Dear Uncle, from Stanislaw there is no hope of post in the foreseeable future, unfortunately.
Everything that's going on in Ukraine is very interesting, but I think you need to explain to listeners why it's relevant right now.
Yeah. Well, what is the story of anybody's life? There's always more threads, more elements than you can talk about in any one story. And if you just look at Israel Gold, my grandfather, your great-grandfather, he was, I guess, very much part of the story of three stories. The story of the Jews in Germany under the Nazis, the story of Zionists and Palestine, and also the story of Ukraine. Now, we've already seen the first impact of the Palestine story in the British government's promise in the Balfour Declaration and how Israel Gold responded to that. And of course, Palestine, we will see, will soon become his greatest practical concern. And as for Ukraine, okay, we're here at the very start of his life, his married life, setting up a family in Germany. Yet it's Ukraine that for the first time matters in his life. The irony is, of course, Israel Gold didn't know it. We know it now. And looking back, we realize what an extraordinary time it was. Just listen. The West Ukrainian Republic was a direct inheritor of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, an empire that Israel Gold had just been fighting on behalf of as part of their army. And the West Ukrainian Republic drew on the empire's most progressive elements: adult emancipation, equality for minorities, multicultural status for minority languages. And that was very much the doing of one of the Republic's founders, Andrei Sheptytsky, who was head of the Ukraine Catholic Church. We are going to hear a great deal more about Sheptytsky and his astonishing courage under the Nazis in future episodes. That's when we will be uncovering the last years of my grandfather's life. But it's because of what happened right now in 1918 to 20 and what it would mean for my grandfather, despite his deportation out of Germany later on, and he would there in Ukraine remain free, earn a living, and feed and house his family for over a year after the Soviet Union had occupied eastern Poland. It was because of his Ukrainian background. And now, to bring the story right up to the here and now, Asher, after the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union, we simply can't ignore the very real alliance between the Nazis and Ukrainian fascist forces, which killed our family and which have been a lethal battleground of historical memory in Ukraine right up to today.
Mike, if you want to be talking about Ukrainian fascism and Ukrainian Nazis, some could argue that you're playing right into the hands of Putin right now.
Yeah, the risk is obvious, isn't it? The bottom line is you have to stick with the story because it doesn't do to airbrush the very real and very bloody alliance between Ukrainian fascists and the Nazis. It's a fact of history. But equally, once you do start talking about that, you have to say that the recent history of Ukraine is an absolute object lesson in how to struggle with an inconvenient past. And that struggle is there, and it's very much live. And thank goodness the forces of acknowledging the past to learn better are winning in Ukraine. So let's return to my grandfather in 1918. Here, on this register card, Leipzig police kept close track of Israel Gold and his family. It's written in Old German script, hard to read. Gold, Israel, born 1895 in Molodkov, that's a village in the Carpathian Mountains above Stanislav. Religion, it's written Mosaic, it means Jewish. Nationality, OH, it means Austro-Hungarian, but that's crossed out. And underneath is written Ukr, UKR, but that's also crossed out. And then Poln, Polnish, Polish. These tiny bureaucratic scribbles show that when the Austrian Empire collapsed, Israel Gold first became Ukrainian and later Polish. And on the other side, this card confirms that he received a Ukrainian passport as soon as November the 11th, 1918, and only much later a Polish passport. Ukrainian nationalism was neither ethnocentric nor anti-Semitic. Poles, Jews and Germans had their own government ministers. Minority languages were respected. The army had Jewish battalions and officers. There were Jewish police, railway workers, doctors and judges. It was like a smaller version of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But in March 1923, the League of Nations awarded Galicia to Poland for 25 years, which Poland accepted, but on condition of its autonomy, which Poland ignored.
Why did they do that then?
I think for once there's a simple answer, and it's that word realpolitik again. The Western nations saw Poland as a more credible bulwark against Bolshevism, against the Soviet Union, than Ukraine. Ironic, isn't it?
Well, after what we've seen the last year, yes.
We're left with this crossed out Ukr, Ukraine, on Israel Gold's register card. The West Ukrainian Republic became a forgotten what-if in European history. Although 20 years later, it would still transform the last years of Israel Gold's life. And years later still, I would find his last Ukrainian colleagues. Whatever kind of Zionist Israel Gold would be, his early experiences will have shown him the strengths of multiculturalism and the perils of ethnic nationalism.
Thanks for listening to Keys. This was episode 6. Next time in Keys, Israel Gold decides Palestine is his future. And the British government shows Zionism the way to achieve a Jewish homeland in Palestine without any Palestinians. That's in episode 7 of Keys, A Troubled Inheritance. An investigation by Mike Joseph into genocide, ethnic cleansing, and one family. You'll find more information on the whole series at mikejoseph.wales. Do join us.